British soccer player David Beckham announced that he would be voting against a British exit of the European Union. And as a soccer player, this was definitely an attempt to kick out any potential ideas of a positive effects of a British exit of the European Union. But while this may have happened, we see that this would be a landmark decision for the voters of Britain in order to conclude a more generous proportion of exactly the effects of the European Union, both on their economy and their political ties. Under Article 50 of the European Union's introduction, we'll see that there's a clause that lets any nation leave the EU when they want to do so. And this is exactly what Britain would do. But being the first country, there are definitely going to be a few consequences that they would encounter. But this only being a fine veneer for what could actually happen in Britain, we would definitely see some effects that could be totally unexpected. But the voting date tomorrow, June 23rd, is coming up sooner than ever, and it seems as if a lot of people are totally unprepared. Prime Minister David Cameron announced that he would let the vote go on, and if to do so, a long, tedious process counting down the next 2 years would allow the process to go to full effect, seeing unconclusive effects that we might not even know yet. But because negotiations and discussions have continued, seeing as this is actually a real prospect that could actually happen, it is important that we ask ourselves today's question. How likely is it for a British exit to actually happen from the EU? Well, the answer is not likely because of 3 major consequences. First is disdain in the UK. Second is a loss of value of the pound. And last is a loss of allies for Britain. Last season on The Bachelor, Ben took Katie to London in order to see if their relationship could move on. But unfortunately, they broke up. And from that one episode, we can definitely conclude that breakups are anything but easy in the UK, which is why we move to today's first point, is that a breakup of the UK's political ties would definitely devastate the region. The Washington Post publishes on June 17th of 2016, explaining that this is more than likely to happen because Scotland, being the first domino in this chain of events, has already announced that they would leave the UK's political ties in order to stay a member of the EU. This being a key player in the decisions of the voters right now, when last year they already voted to see if they would leave the area altogether. But politically speaking, this would not be ideal and would only cause further disdain in the region. And for the UK, this would be a domestic problem, as commodity prices would go up and their economy would already tank in the short term and most likely in the long term as well. But this political disdain could reach farther into Europe, and we could see that Britain would lose 3 out of its 5 biggest steel importers and would lose even more than that in the future. And this being so, it's clear that this would be one of the biggest consequences for Britain to see, and why it's not likely that a British exit of the European Union would actually happen. But next, we have to look to the loss of value of the sterling pound, which is going to be today's second point, is that a big consequence would be the loss of value of the sterling pound. The National Review writes on June 20th of 2016, explaining that this would be right now is one of the biggest game pieces on the global board. And for Britain, this is something they can't afford to lose. Voting to leave the EU would definitely tank their currency because it would increase the demand for domestic goods, increasing spending, but also causing inflation, and would lose one of the biggest pieces of referendum that they have in power in the Europe region. But unfortunately, this is going to cause even worse than that. Not only are they going to lose the value of their currency, but it would tank their economy further than they already are, and a small recession is more than likely to happen because of that. But British voters in the past have voted against these kind of things, and seeing this, and even though the polls are tighter than ever, it's going to be clear that it's not likely for this to actually pass because of the loss of their sterling pound. And this sterling value is exactly what they're going to need in order to keep their economies as one of the top 10 in the world. The Washington Post publishes in a separate article on June 15th of 2016, explaining that for London itself and the rest of the UK, it's going to be important to look to this before making any voting decisions and to see if the Parliament is ready to make a decision such as this. But next, in today's third and final point, we're going to see one of the biggest consequences is that the UK will lose most of their allies because of the decision. The Washington Post publishes in a third and final article on June 2nd of 2016 that this would be a landmark decision for their allies, and countries such as Germany have already been late to wake up to the call. Politico writes on June 20th of 2016, explaining that for Germany, this is a dangerous prospect, but being late to the call, they're going to see that this is going to be a problem that they can't fix themselves, meaning that they're going to have to influence Britain and they can in the next 2 days to prevent this kind of decision from being made. This would eventually cause dependency on Germany itself, which would lead Germany to no longer trade with the UK, because all the countries in the European Union would rely on Germany for economic stability of the euro. And this would be bad for Germany, and Germany would take this out on Britain to prevent them from having an economic success that they have been costed for. But other countries such as France, President Hollande and Premier Merkel from Belgium have both agreed that they are in disdain of Britain for even considering an idea like this, let alone putting it on a ballot. And for voters to pass such a thing as this, they would definitely lose these allies both in the military and most likely politically and economically as well, which is why it's important to see this and encounter this idea before we can jeopardize it to see if Britain will actually pass an idea such as this. So, in conclusion, when we sum up today's question, well, is a British vote actually going to happen to help exit the EU? The answer is going to be, fortunately, no, for 3 big consequences that could happen. First is a breakup of the UK's political ties. Second is a loss of the sterling pound's value. And last is that we're going to see Britain's loss of allies in the region. So when considering David Beckham's statement that he's not going to vote for a Brexit in today's world, we'll see that this is a goal that he has kicked into, and this is definitely going to be something that won't happen.